Good evening. I'd like to welcome you all to our presentation. I would particularly like to thank you all for coming. My name's Greg Winston, and I'm the President and Chairman of the Board of Directors of Mid-Cape Church Homes. And Mid-Cape Church Homes Incorporated, 501(c) nonprofit organization that was formed in 1975 and which does business now as Pine Oaks Village Homes. There's been a lot of information on social media about our organization, Pine Oaks Village Homes, and our plans for Pine Oaks Village 4. I hope that after all that you've heard from our team, after you all will hear from our team of experts, you will leave here feeling as excited as about our future and what it holds for our town of Harwich as we are. One thing that's been discussed is the word church, okay? Our corporate name in 1975, almost 50 years ago, the pastor of the First Congregational Church, Reverend Ronander, took a group of congregants and leaders aside and planted a seed about the need for affordable housing for seniors and handicapped individuals, particularly in our town in the Harwich area. So those leaders included John Nelson. John Nelson Way actually is the road leading into Pine Oaks Villages 1 and 2. Paul Doan, wonderful man who's been with us on the board for years and retired. And others, so many others that were part of the nonprofit. Mid-Cape Church Homes, which ultimately has become unaffiliated with any church today, proceeded to build 3 communities, Pine Oaks Villages 1, Pine Oaks Village 2, and Pine Oaks Village 3. We are now providing 163 units for the elderly and the disabled, persons who are disabled, not necessarily elderly. Pine Oaks Village Homes has a 12-member volunteer, unpaid board comprised of folks who live in or connected to the town of Harwich. Many members of our board grew up together, attended high school together, and have continued to be lifelong friends. Living in Harwich and being active members in our community, we saw things changing. Our children, our friends' children, and grandchildren were being forced out of our community by the rising cost of housing. It was, as a board, that we decided we needed to expand our vision past the elderly and disabled and to focus on the housing needs of families and young people just starting out. We kept hearing from our local businesses about their inability to find help due to rising housing costs. These needs range from restaurants closing 1 day a week for the lack of kitchen and wait staff persons, grocery store clerks that can't afford to live in town, a lack of home health aides, I need one, local fire and police departments struggling to hire from within the town because of the inability to find primary care physicians and school teachers. And I point out when I say school teachers and primary care physicians, I'm also talking about entry-level positions in this community that people can't afford to live here. After COVID, people began making their second home here. They realized that a primary home here was nice, and we saw rising home prices. People were selling their homes to corporations for rentals or renting them as short-term rentals like Airbnb and VRBO. I have to smile now because someone said I never smile. So I'm going to smile. But I'm going to say this sincerely. We definitely have a crisis on our hands. And without affordable housing, there will be no offered services to the residents of our community. Just head off Cape on a weekday morning and see the incredible amount of traffic coming onto the Cape. Cars, vans, trucks, filled with workers who cannot afford to live on Cape Cod. Folks, please listen to our panel of experts, and they're excellent. They made a wonderful presentation this afternoon. And if you have the ability to open your mind, please listen to what they have to say. I'm so proud to have been working with them for so many months and years. So, okay, we're proposing 248 units, but built in 5 phases over 10 years, which would have Pine Oaks Village 4 completed somewhere in 2036. And Bob will say, don't say it, Greg, but I might not be living in 2036. This plan was developed by 12 local people. 12 local people, they're all in this room. 12 local people who are on the board of directors. Every one of these units, 240 of these units, will be below market rate rents. Not just a portion of them, all of them. Admittedly. There's going to be increased density. But don't we have increased density already? Every time a big home's built along the beach. However, of the approximately 518 residents, that's about 100 every 2 years. Not all of them will be old enough to drive. Not every one of them will even have a car. Which is why the Cape Cod Regional Transit Authority is intending to bring a route to our community. This is part of our infrastructure plan. Pine Oaks Village is not the cause of the existing traffic problem. It's something the town needs to address. With or without Pine Oaks 4, we at Pine Oaks 4 are committed to working very closely with the town to find a solution. And here, we will have on-site property management. I have a property management team who did a wonderful job this morning with this presentation earlier today. Our properties are managed so well. We're not going to build it and walk away. We meet at least monthly with our management team, and we as a board, every member of our board has oversight, and every member of the Halkine management staff listens to what we have to say. So that's why it's so important for the community to become involved in Pine Oaks Village Homes, because our board's getting old. Today, we ask you to leave all of the things that you've heard at the door. That door, that door, that door. Just leave them at the door. We're your neighbors, we're your friends, and we're very concerned. We care about it as much about Harwich as you do. And we are taking this opportunity to share the truth and to answer all your questions. I know there's some folks in this room who have come just to voice their complaints. Whether they're grounded in fact or not, let us work for that. For those in the room who are thoughtfully considering this project and the impact it can have on our community, I thank you all so much for coming today. Lastly, as I said at the top, we're at a crisis point. We're not meeting the needs of our community, our businesses, our essential services, and our schools. Our current housing stock is not going to fall, and prices are only going to increase. Wages are not going to suddenly double or triple for the working class. Put yourself in the shoes of the folks who need an option to stay on Cape Cod. We can grow and benefit together. We can no longer kick this down the road. This is a problem we have to address now. Knowing and agreeing on the facts that we need a solution, we have to put forward one that will help Harwich immensely. Please help us. I thank you so much, and at this point in time, I'd like to turn over the rest of this presentation to our Vice President, the most knowledgeable man in the world, Bob Doan.
Thank you, Greg. Thank you for coming out to join us. The goal tonight is to provide you with an opportunity to listen and to ask questions to the team behind Pine Oaks Village 4. Just notice that if you are looking for Spanish or Portuguese interpretation, please step to the back corner, you'll get headsets. When you came in, on your seats were cards, index cards. On that card, you'll be able to write any questions you have regarding Pine Oak Village 4. Members of our board of directors will be walking up and down aisles collecting cards. After the presentations, the question and answer period will begin. Please provide your name and email address so that if we don't get to your question, we will respond via email. Please make sure you do write all your questions on the cards. As we continue to move through the process of building Pine Oaks 4, there will be more public input meetings with the Zoning Board of Appeals. For nearly 50 years, Pine Oaks Village Homes has been providing exceptional quality housing for the elderly and non-elderly disabled. Pine Oaks Village 1 was opened in 1980 with 60 apartments, Pine Oaks 2, 1990 with 38 units, and Pine Oaks 3 with 65 apartments in 2003. And Pine Oaks 3 is just catty-cornered across the street next to the high school. The housing crisis on the Cape has continued to escalate since 2005. The Community Development Partnership has done an incredible work in promoting affordable housing. Here's a little more to tell about it is Amanda Bebrin. I really welcome you, Amanda.
Thank you, Bob, for the warm welcome, and thank you all for being here tonight. As Bob said, my name is Amanda Bebrin. I am the Director of Housing Advocacy at the Community Development Partnership. We're a housing organization, and housing organizations love a mouthful to turn into an acronym. So the Community Development Partnership serves the Lower and Outer Cape. We develop, manage, and advocate for affordable housing. We also provide small business technical assistance to support economic development across the region. And the Pine Oaks Board asked me to come speak for a couple minutes tonight because my team of 4 monitors and supports housing efforts across the region in the 8 Lower and Outer Cape towns. And we have a huge disconnect, as Greg made reference to. We have a real gap in housing affordability. Even before we talk about capital A affordable housing that comes with subsidies, just housing that people can afford to live in. Our region has a really big problem with that. There is no town on the Lower and Outer Cape where the average income is enough for people to be able to rent or buy a home. So the latest numbers for Harwich, the median price for a single family home in Harwich is $805,000. The average area median income, or AMI, for a family of 4 for Barnstable County for 2024 is $122,000, but the income needed to purchase an $800,000 house is well in excess of $220,000. So right off the bat, there's a $100,000 gap. And that's before we take into account the fact that most households are smaller than 4 people. You might only have 1 earner, and the Cape Cod Commission reports that average wages are somewhere around $79,000. So this huge, huge gap between this isn't just getting people a little bit closer and then they'll be able to afford homes, a truly insurmountable gap. When we talk about big A affordable housing that comes with subsidies, Greg also made reference to a lot of the people who are impacted. And while we talk about it as being low to moderate income housing, I think we don't have a good sense of who is really captured within those income ranges. And so again, as Greg mentioned, those are our teachers, our nurses, our first responders, many of our municipal employees, most employees of the local businesses that we love and customize and rely upon. There's a lot of people who work really critical jobs for our region that would qualify for affordable housing. And I think those people ourselves or themselves don't even realize that they would be caught under that umbrella. So truly, the work of affordable housing is to give people who are doing things that are important to our community, whether that's working jobs or just being here and bringing their time and talent to Harwich, giving those people housing options that they can afford to pay for and live in. I'd like to mention the sort of regional aspect of this because we do work regionally. So affordable housing, putting those financing packages together is a real jigsaw puzzle. And if I talked about it, it would put you all to sleep pretty much immediately. So I'll stay away from that. But you have money that comes maybe from other towns, from the rest of the state, and even from the rest of the country. But if you have affordable housing in your town, you're lucky enough that it's already within your zip code. You've already got a jump on being able to be closer to those units or to occupy those units. But what we think of, who we think of as being local people, people who are Harwich residents in their hearts, aren't necessarily what the process or the paperwork considers being local people. And increasingly, we see local people are moving away or have had to move away. Maybe they live in Yarmouth, maybe they live in Plymouth or Wareham or further away, and they're commuting. Affordable housing is a way to help those people be able to come home to the place where maybe they grew up and would like to raise their own families, or a place where they lived for a long time and were unable to keep up with the costs of it. So as we think about housing, it does not respect town lines, and this is truly a regional issue. And for each town to be furthering initiatives in ways that make sense to them is all part of the puzzle that helps keep not just Harwich, but our whole region really vibrant. So in closing, I would just say that we already know that 1/3 of Harwich homeowners and 1/3 of Harwich renters are cost burdened. That means that they're already spending more than 30% of their take-home pay on just housing alone. And when you're spending more than 30% of your income on just the housing, it makes the rest of all the things you have to do really, really challenging. It's hard to bring your whole self to your work, to being a parent, to being a friend and a family member, to participating in your community, in your local government. So having places that people can afford to live is good for the human in us, as well as, we talk about the workforce, we talk about the jobs needed. It's good for people to have stability, that they don't have to worry about this, in addition to all of the other things that we all manage on a daily and yearly basis. Thank you all so much for being here tonight and having an interest in this, and look forward to the rest of a great presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda. One of the things you mentioned about, with people going off Cape at night because they can't afford to live here, well, that's an economic driver that's lost, because when they live here, they'll use our restaurants, whether it be a breakfast restaurant, and they'll use our sporting events and other entertainment, so the money will stay in Harwich. Do want to remind you, any questions, please write me a card. We'll give you plenty of cards. You can write as many questions as you want. So as our board continues to see the escalation of the crisis and decline of affordable housing, it was felt time was to expand beyond the elderly, and reached out to Jim Perrin at Commonwealth Community Developers. Jim had just completed Yarmouth Gardens on Route 28. Jim became our consultant to begin to assist us in our next community, Pine Oaks Village 4. I'd like to welcome Jim at this point. Get the laptop. There you go. There's
Thank you, Bob. And I want to just warn you, I'm probably going to mess up the technology a little bit, so please be patient with me. First, I want to mention a little bit about demographics. Harwich, as you know, and is true of all the Cape really, is getting older. And the number or the portion of persons over 65 in town over the past dozen years or so has gone up by about 25%. And at the same time, the portion of people under 18 years of age has gone down by an equivalent amount. So why I mention this is, you know, of course, people like to retire to the Cape. People have homes, they stay in the homes, that's a good thing. But I think it points out a couple of things. One is we may not have enough options for people who are ready to sell their house to move into something smaller, possibly a rental. And secondly, the idea that some of the younger people and the families that they grew up in can't afford to be here, and so they're gone, and that hurts our workforce. And as Bob mentioned, it hurts the economic activity in town. And so that is is a significant concern that we have, and a particular reason why Cape-wide, the housing crisis, the shortage of enough housing, the shortage of affordable housing is becoming worse and worse, and it's time to do something about it. So, so I wanted to then get into specifically what we're thinking about in Pine Oaks Village 4. And I think I knew it. I put up some numbers, and it's my chance to put everybody to sleep. I've done that with the board several times. And, but the first idea is we will have a range of affordability, ranging from, you know, our limits, that is the upper limit of what someone can make in terms of their income, for about 22% of the units will be affordable to people who earn up to 30% of the median income. I'll get into what that is in a minute. Conversely, on the higher end, we'll have about 20% that's set aside for people who are up to 100% or 110% of the median income. The median income is the level of income where half of the people earn less and half earn more. And in this case, we're talking about the median income for Barnstable County, because that's how the federal government designates it. So, the lower table behind me shows the AMI, area median income limits. So for example, a single person earning $26,580 would be at the 30% area median income. A household of two people earning $60,780 would be at 60% of the area median income. And and a household of four people where they earn $139,000 would be at 110% of the median income. So for people, you know, if you're curious to say, where would I fall in this, you can look and see by your household size kind of what range you might be in. But the thing I want to mention is I talked about a family of four with $139,000 of income. That is something that could be a two-earner family, and that's not that uncommon, but they're still struggling. And so we thought we ought to have a good mixture of affordability as well as different sizes of apartments. We'll have 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms. Some of the 3 bedrooms will be townhouses, and some of the 2 bedrooms for that matter. So we're anticipating creating a sort of broad-based little community, a little neighborhood. The other thing I wanted to mention was how many people are going to be living at the property. Bob had gone and found a report on residential demographic multipliers prepared by eConsult Solutions. And they're consultants, and they work with this kind of thing all the time. And they found that, and we gave, we basically went in and said, according to their formula, based on the sizes of our apartments, we could expect for the entire project, all 5 phases, to have about 518 people living on site. And of that number, about 69 would be school-aged children. And that's based on their work looking at other similar type apartments in Massachusetts. And so I think this will give an idea perhaps of, if you think about it, we're planning this 5 phases. The phases will probably be done over 10 years. That means we're getting about 100 people a year. And that means that we're getting maybe, 14 students a year added, and that's every 2 years, that is, added to the schools. The other thing about the schools, the number of the enrollment in the schools has been going down. Okay, so it's been going down, and that, as you see from when I mentioned about the number of children 18 and under going down 25% over the past dozen years, that trend has been continuing. That will cause issues with the school in terms of ability, how much state funding they get, can they afford to keep promoting or having the programs that they have. And so to stabilize that, this, a development such as Pine Oaks Village 4 will be of great help. One other thing which I forgot to mention, which relates back to this one, this chart, rents. Someone had asked at a previous session, how much of my income will I have to pay in rent? And basically it's 30% is the figure. The limit is sort of each of these limits, you take 30% of that on a monthly basis, and that's what you would need to be paying in rent. Anyway, that's okay. Anyway, that's all I have to say, but thank you very much.
Thank you.
So our next step in the process, after we had Jim come on board, was to find an architect and engineering firm. So I would like to introduce Icon from Boston, Icon Architecture Boston, who is run by Michelle Arpegian and Jonathan Lashley, who is here tonight to talk about the design features and why we have chosen certain routes on our design. So, Jonathan?
All right. Make sure you hear me tonight. Thank you, Bob. My name is Jonathan Lashley, and I'm here from Icon Architecture. And I just want to say that I am one of the people who comes and goes from the Cape a lot. I grew up on and off the Cape, and my parents live in Truro. So this project is very special to me, and I definitely could say that they fall into the category of people who could benefit from services that would be a result of potentially building more affordable housing in this region. Icon is a Boston-based firm of about 50 people and is a longtime leader in affordable housing and affordable multifamily housing. We've designed thousands of units across Massachusetts and here on the Cape and throughout New England. And we believe that we are a perfect choice for this project. Nope, knew I was going to get it wrong. Icon's also recognized leaders in sustainable design, which we integrate into all of our construction projects, and are investing greatly in sustainability and climate resilience in Pine Oaks Village 4, and a little bit more about that in a couple slides. So I want to begin by giving some overall context to the project site selection and how this will serve as a great selection for affordable family housing in Harwich. To begin with, there are a variety of physical resources, including roads and thoroughfares taking you in and out of the area. So Queen Anne Road to the north there, Main Street to the south, which would take you to the town center, as well as an existing vehicular easement right there. And the site also connects to walking trails and a variety of natural opportunities. As far as community resources go, in that immediate radius, a very quick drive, we have a variety of things, such as the food pantry, churches and parks, tennis courts, Cranberry Farm, the Arts Center, and many more things. All right. We worked for many months, if not years, with our client here to consider the language of the town and the vernacular Cape architecture to make sure that our buildings capture the local character which we all have come to love and many of us have grown up with, and that the project as designed does not feel out of place while still feeling fresh. So on the screen, you'll see some precedent images. In particular review, many of you will be familiar with the Port Restaurant, and that really makes up the character of the town. And so we're not interested in deviating from that. And then you'll see some other local Cape Cod precedents and see some themes that you'll begin to notice are repeating. So sloped roofs, shingles, wood siding, traditional windows with shutters, and we really want to preserve these themes in our architecture, and I think you're going to see that in the renderings coming up. Yes, no? All right, so the next step was to consider zoning. The project, as has been stated before, has 5 phases. You're going to sort of see on this diagram, this is mainly addressing the first phase of 50 units. The project is in the RL zoning district in Harwich. So there it is there. And we will be meeting presumably with the zoning board in the next month or two. I should take a moment to say that this project will be a 40B project, and to give a quick lesson in what that is in case you don't know. 40B is a state statute, longstanding state statute that aids communities in constructing affordable housing where there isn't enough affordable housing in those communities. It helps them get through the zoning process more smoothly. So what you'll see here on the chart in gray is a limited number of areas where we don't in fact abide by the zoning in the RL district. The 40B process would technically allow us to probably leapfrog over that anyway, but I want to make the point that most things we're right of way, which is really great. We're following the setbacks, we're following the clear area on the site. We are over in terms of the building heights, and we are over in terms of the minimum lot area per dwelling unit, and that is coming from the fact that our buildings are densely constructed, providing many more units in a smaller footprint, which is part of our sustainability strategy. As mentioned earlier, it's very important to this project, to the owner, and to the design team to create an environmentally friendly, highly sustainable, and green project. Pine Oaks Village 4 will pursue 2 nationally recognized sustainability certification programs, Passive House and Enterprise Green Communities. Passive House encourages the design of the building to act like a thermos, wherein the building is highly insulated and airtight, so that energy use and heating and cooling waste is minimized, while Enterprise Green Communities aligns affordable housing investment strategies with a variety of environmentally responsible building practices. And just to highlight a few of these features that will be found throughout the building and site design, the systems in the building will be all electric, so there will be no gas or diesel in the project. As I mentioned, the building envelope, the outside of the building will be very tight and high performing. The windows will be triple glazed, very low carbon emissions, state-of-the-art high efficiency HVAC systems, fresh air delivered to each dwelling unit, Energy Star certified appliances, EV stations, and solar PV arrays on the roofs of all of the buildings, which will help then offset the grid loads on those buildings. All right, so here's a little overall context for the site. You'll see Main Street here, and that's towards the town center. Up here you have Queen Anne Road. Along Main Street here, there's already some residential, so it's appropriate to develop our site here. And to the north here, there is a existing industrial commercial area where there is some context for some larger scale buildings. And I would be remiss to say, I got a reminder earlier to point out where the site is on this map for those of you who might be having trouble reading it. Here's the overall project here, tucked into the woods here. And actually what's very illuminating about this image is that I think it goes to show that we're not clear cutting the site. We're leaving a lot of the natural vegetation already there, and that we're building in small, dense pockets. And so a lot of the nature that's there is going to remain. In fact, what you can see here surrounding the site is a buffer of existing trees that are going to remain on all sides. All right, here's a nice crisper site diagram. I'm going to walk you through the site a little bit. Again, let me know if, just look. There's Queen Anne Road. There's the new entrance into the site. This is the boundary of the first phase, the phase that we're interested in building most immediately. It comprises of 2 townhome buildings and a larger mid-rise building that we're going to refer to as the Lodge. So you come in off of Queen Anne Road, you enter into a really neighborhood-scaled new series of roads, street parking and off-street parking. The entire site is fully accessible by wheelchair-accessible sidewalks, which is going to be made in an effort to increase neighborhood interaction. There is that fire access road down here that is just going to be remain for emergency use only. And again, we'll see that lots of open space or undeveloped space around and open spaces around the developed parts of the project. And importantly, this east-west orientation allows for maximized solar use of the rooftops on all of the buildings. Oh, nope, never gonna get it right. Real quickly, and I think Horsley Witten may address some more of the many more of the site concerns, but just to show you the different phases here, the pink is phase 1. And zooming in on phase 1, you'll see a childcare building, townhouse with 6 units and 8 units, and then the Lodge building, which is 3 stories of 36 units. All right, now for the fun part. So these are our rendered views. You'll see here coming into the project off of Queen Anne Road. Want to point out the scale and form. It's very pedestrian friendly. The buildings are all limited to 2 to 3 stories. You have pitched roofs, which is very reminiscent of the local Cape Cod architecture, dormers. The materials are traditional, Cape Cod shingles, shutters, wood look. There's a really nice rhythm and proportion to the buildings. You have these sort of bays and projections, windows, and pops of color. And again, the access, the sidewalks are all fully accessible, and you can come and go from the townhouse units on grade. They're fully wheelchair accessible. Moving further into the site, that's the front view of the larger 2 of the townhouse units. We have these lovely variegated entries, sort of quaint dormers, keeping the scale down, kind of whimsical pops of color, really lovely. And here's our Lodge building. So 3 stories, it is larger, but the use of dormers, I think, keeps the feeling of the scale down, as does the sort of ins and outs playing with the front facade alleviates the sense of overwhelming scale. I should mention that this building is fully accessible. It's made up of one-story flat apartments, fully elevators served all 3 stories, so I know there's concerns of aging in place, and these units are all fully accessible. And then here is some typical floor plans. On the left, you'll see a 2-bedroom townhouse unit. The bottom floor is visitable, meaning anyone in a wheelchair or anyone who's disabled can come into the first floor, use the restroom, use the kitchen. These are better units, perhaps for families, right? They're 2 bedrooms up the stairs. They average about 1,000 square feet. The right-hand image is a typical 1-bedroom and a typical 2-bedroom unit in the Lodge building. Again, fully accessible. A 1-bedroom unit is about 650 square feet, and a 2-bedroom unit is about 800 square feet. And on that note, I'm going to turn it over to Rich Claytor from Horsley Witten.
Thank you, Jonathan. My name is Rich Claytor. I'm a Principal Water Resources Engineer with Horsley Witten Group. We're located in Sandwich. Horsley Witten is a 75-plus environmental consulting firm, providing engineering, planning, and science as our primary services. We do a lot of different things, including water supply development for municipalities, infrastructure support for municipalities and private clients. And maybe most relevant to tonight's discussion is we do a lot of affordable housing. Our firm is a mission-driven firm, and one of the key components of our mission is to help support a world where people and nature thrive together. So our approach to affordable housing is to make sure that we promote affordable housing projects that are designed sensitively with the sites that they are that they occupy. I'm going to speak first about the nature of the site and the ecology a little bit, and then I'll turn this over to my colleague, Joe Henderson, and he'll talk a little bit more about our infrastructure. This figure shows the site boundary and the regulated wetland areas mapped for the site. Some of them are off-site, and they have the wetlands themselves are generally depression wetlands. They are kettle holes, and they each have a defined ecology, and they obviously intercept groundwater in order to maintain the wetlands component of it. They also have regulatory buffers, both state buffers and local buffers in Harwich. There are essentially 4 of them in the site. I'll go over them a little bit. You'll notice the little one right in the center, kind of right there, is a very small wetland and does not have the buffers with it. It is below the threshold for regulatory protection under both the state and the local bylaw and regulations. The site itself is a typical Cape Cod pine oak woodland community, and no pun intended with the Pine Oaks Village, but it's very suitable here. The dominant species are black and white oaks and pitch pine, very typical of Cape Cod and dominant on the Cape. Understory of black huckleberry, bayberry, arrowwood, and nannyberry. These are all typical understory plants in the community. Ground cover includes teaberry, lowbush, blueberry, and bracken fern. I state all of this stuff because these elements contribute to the wildlife and to the natural environment that we are going to try to be sensitive to, or will be sensitive to as we develop the final designs. The site, as I said, has 4 on-site wetlands, really 3 that are fully within the property, and then 1 that is off the property to the south. Again, 1 is non-regulatory. The other 3 include a abandoned cranberry bog. I'll talk about that in a moment. To the north is the Herring River. Herring River is just within 200 feet of the northern property boundary, just about 10 feet into the property is a 200-foot riverfront area. That is just crossing the Queen Anne Road. There are no state mapped habitats for rare or threatened wildlife or species. So nothing has been identified by the state in their mapping. They do update those about every 5 to 7 years, and there's nothing on there currently. In terms of the wetlands, again, I kind of talked about this a little bit already. The 4 wetlands include the non-regulatory wetland, very small, less than 1,200 square feet or about 1,200 square feet. Wetland B is in the northerly portion of the site. It is mostly off of the property, but the buffers do encroach or come into the property, and our designs have been sensitive to those buffers. Wetland C is an abandoned cranberry bog. It's on the south of the property. That does incorporate some interesting successional components of vegetation: red maple, high bush blueberry, inkberry, sphagnum moss, and remnant cranberries. And wetland D, just off the south of our property, is perhaps the most sensitive, including some of the same materials, but a couple of Atlantic white cedar. So I tell you all of this so that you understand that we first start with an assessment of the natural environment before we sort of dive into the land development component of the affordable housing. So with that, let me turn it over to Joe, and he can tell you more about what we're proposing.
Got it. Thanks, Rich. Hi, everyone. My name is Joe Henderson. Ooh, it's still loud. I've been working at Horsley Witten now for over 20 years. I'm a civil engineer, focused on environmental, and I've done many affordable housing projects throughout the Cape, from design through construction. So I thought I would walk through some of our site design elements, and then we can look at the site plan in a little bit more detail. So the first thing I wanted to start with was the setbacks and open space. Our goal here is to provide a 25-foot buffer around the perimeter of the property. Now, it's not encompassing the entire property. There are some areas still that don't meet that, but I would say predominantly we have maintained a 25-foot buffer. There are 2 areas within the property, or I'll call it the development area. I'll show you the map there in a little bit. But those 2 areas are going to be preserved as completely natural, so there will be no work within that area. So saying that, under the town zoning, we have 71% open space. And that just means that if you take out the buildings and the roads and whatnot, that's how much area is open. Now, if we look at it from the perspective of how much area is going to remain natural, that's completely undisturbed area within our development area. That's 41%. So if we talked about the total acreage of the property at 30 acres, approximately 13 acres of that would remain completely undisturbed. 17 of it is part of the project. So I'll show that on a map here in a few minutes. The wastewater, this is not a standard Title V septic system. This is a wastewater treatment plant, so we have to meet more stringent regulations. The state regulates this under the Mass DEP groundwater discharge permit standards. So any system over 10,000 gallons per day would have to meet these regulations. So our flow, the proposed flow, is just under 50,000 gallons per day for this project, and that's all based on the proposed number of bedrooms. That's how it's calculated. Stormwater management, we at Horsley Witten, as Rich was talking about, we use a green infrastructure approach. So we use low impact development where we're using like bioretention filters, tree trenches, which integrate trees into the treatment portion of the stormwater. And then we'll either use natural areas on a site, or we'll use underground infiltration to get rid of the larger storm events. Our landscape approach is going to be based on a native species. So we're going to only specify native species, the native plantings, and that goes for the grasses, the shrubs, and all the trees. And then I know that there's trails out on this property. We have maps showing those trails, and our goal here is to maintain those trails as much as possible, respecting them with our proposed development. So inevitably, in any project that goes to construction, there's erosion and sediment control, site clearing. So that's a big part of this project, some point down the future, to make sure we integrate like silt fences, silt socks, all these different types of controls, and especially in sensitive areas like where there's our wetlands. So I just wanted to show a few representative photos of some other projects we've worked on. This is these two pictures are of a stormwater management practices, so like a bioretention, as I mentioned. Again, it's integrated with the landscape, so our plantings with our landscape plan would be integrated with that stormwater management feature, and that would be a filter type device that would be used to treat what we call the water quality volume of a storm. So those two pictures represent that. The third picture here is just an example of some native plantings next to a building. You can see here, this is what a wastewater treatment plant might look like, with a building, some underground tankage, and not seen here would be the effluent disposal, treated effluent disposal fields. The last two photos show kind of how we can integrate the existing trees in this particular case into our proposed site. And in the second photo, we've actually integrated a walkway into a larger area of trees that were maintained on the project site. All right, so back to our rendered plan here. This is, again, just an overview of the site. I just want to point out a couple things on this plan. The lighter color here would be representing our developed area, so that there would be we'd set up our erosion control around the perimeter of this area, and then the darker green would be where the natural undisturbed area would be. So the white outline is the site, our developed site, and all that dark green within there would be completely untouched natural areas. So in general, the site, as far as our parking for the overall site, we're proposing 420 spaces to meet the demand for parking. Those would be a combination of parallel spots and 90-degree typical parking like we see. There'd also be EV charging stations integrated with that, and handicap parking spaces. We have dumpster locations also pointed out. There's some here and here and here, so those would be for the trash disposal. And then we also will integrate like bike racks and amenities for the folks that live there too. So I'm going to just zoom into one little area of the site just to give a little example of some of the practices that we're using. This is the phase 4 and 5 area that we looked at earlier on the phasing plan. And I just picked this because it does have the wastewater facility, and I can talk about that a little bit more. But I just wanted to start with the stormwater. So here's the bioretention filters I talked about. Those are designed to treat the parking areas, so the pollutants on the parking areas within that first water quality flush would be filtered through these bioretention areas. The larger storm events would then pass through those and would be discharged into like one of these natural depressions. There's several of these depressions on the site. I can go back, why don't I see if I can show everyone that. I'm going the wrong way. There we go. All right, so here we go. So Rich talked about depressions. There's a natural depression here that we're planning to utilize for stormwater. There's also, these actual native areas are also somewhat depressions. And then again, this is a large natural depression that's fully contained on site, so it can be utilized for stormwater management. That will help with limiting our development area. The other thing that can help limit our development area will be utilizing narrower streets. So we're proposing 20-foot roads where there's no parking, 24-foot drive aisles for parking areas. And then, it was talked about before, but this is just an 18 or 20-foot wide emergency access gated road that would only be used for emergency purposes. All right, back to this. So lastly, I just want to talk about the wastewater. We're proposing a wastewater plan. It has a high level of treatment, has to meet the state requirements. And what the components would typically be made of would have a treatment building, which would be a portion of this maintenance building for the controls and electronic and any equipment that needed to be sheltered. The underground tanks would be located in this proximity here, and then that highly treated effluent would be discharged to the ground. A groundwater discharge permit is what the permit that would be received. So typically that's just discharged to the ground surface. You can also see on here that we've got an array of trees and shrubs and plantings around the building as far as our landscape plan. And these lighter green areas represent the lawn area, and the darker shaded here is where we would expect to use a more less maintained grass, high meadow type mix that is more drought tolerant and more sustainable. And I think the last thing, just you see all these bios, and now, I talked about natural depressions. All this, we've done a lot of work to this point to grade the site and direct all the stormwater to certain areas, and we're required to put together a report that outlines how we manage the stormwater on the property and how we are meeting the state stormwater standards. All right, with that, I think I'm going to pass it back to Bob.
Yeah, thank you very much. It was the most interesting part, I thought. Anyways, we did have an earlier question that I am going to talk about is why did you choose this location for the project? Well, this location has a lot of smaller parcels of land that were disjointed and did not have access. And we had knew some of our, the town knew we were looking for places to build Pine Oaks for. And we were approached saying, I got a piece of land, but I don't know if you can use it or not. And we worked together and we put together 8 separate parcels to build this whole one area. And so that's how we came about to coming to this area. It also had no wildlife restrictions on it. It wasn't in a level 2 water discharge where you have your town water wells. And in the meantime, do hand in your questions, and if you need more cards, please ask for them. So the next topic, of course, and early on, everybody wants to know what the impact of traffic is going to be. And so we engaged Vanessa and Associates to do a study for us, to take measurements, and it was done in July, take road measurements around the different intersections. So the next speaker will be Jeffrey Dirk. I'd like to welcome him. He is the principal or managing partner of Vanessa, and he can explain his process and what his determinations were.
Perfect, thank you. Thank you and good evening. I think as you heard from introduction, my name is Jeffrey Dirk. I'm the managing partner with Vanessa and Associates, and we are transportation engineers and planners. Let me see if I can get this to go in the right direction. Here we go. Perfect. So far, so good. You're lucky. So just by way of background, I think as you'd heard from the other members of the project team, our firm conducts a significant amount of work on the Cape as well as on Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard. Affordable housing projects is a significant part of our business. We do a lot of affordable work on a lot of affordable housing projects on Cape Cod in particular. I mention that as well because we not only serve as developers' representatives, but we represent a number of cities and towns on Cape Cod in reviewing these projects. So similar to as you're looking at this project and evaluating, how this will impact you, we do serve as the transportation consultants to a number of towns. So the town of Barnstable, the town of Falmouth, just to name a few. We undertake review of these types of projects for the community and represent the citizens of the communities as well. And as I go through the presentation, I think some of the things I want you to think about, and I think some of the other speakers before me have spoken about opportunities, and it's kind of something that you don't often think about as transportation because we're talking about adding traffic on roadways, which clearly has impacts. It increases delays, increases vehicle queuing. What's most important to me is how it relates to safety on the roadway, and I know that's something that's of concern to you as well. When I'm talking about opportunities, is always to remember with development also comes improvements. And so it shouldn't be looked at as the developer coming forward and saying, we're going to build this and drop this at this site, and you're going to be stuck with the roadway network and the traffic that comes from it. Opportunities exist to improve the roadway network. So as you're thinking about your questions and looking at the impacts of this project, is also to think about what could be done to address the concerns that you have as it relates to walking, biking, and the safety on the roadway network as well. And that should be some of the questions, and those are great questions that I'd like to have asked of me, because one of the things we can also talk about in terms of opportunities is that the creation of affordable housing, as you've heard, the state, it's something that's very important to the state. And I think through all of the mandates that the state has. With those mandates also come legislative action as it relates to grant opportunities. Affordable housing unlocks grant opportunities, and grant opportunities as they relate to transportation infrastructure, I think, is one of the critical things. That is typically a part of almost all of the affordable housing projects I work on. The state wants the housing created. You heard all of the reasons why it needs to be created. As transportation planners, these types of grants, which are Mass Works grants and Mass Housing grants, as some of the titles of these, that allows the town at no cost to the community to build sidewalks on roadways where there are not sidewalks. Queen Anne Road does not have sidewalks. You've heard presentations from the team about how we're building sidewalks within the site, get you out to Queen Anne Road, but of course there's nothing to connect to. Because of the lack of sidewalks, these grants unlock money that, again, doesn't cost the community anything to construct these sidewalks, to improve intersections, and to make real physical infrastructure change that are needed whether this project moves forward or not. But the creation of affordable housing allows for these things to take place. So again, I just want you to think about that as I talk about the amount of traffic that's going to be added to the roadway and what the impacts may be as well. So I think, as you heard mentioned, we knew transportation was going to be a concern very early in the process. And so the developer and the team here undertook the preparation of a comprehensive, what we call a transportation impact assessment. And those of you that may attend zoning board or planning board hearings, you might have heard some presentations as they relate to this type of a study. But a transportation impact assessment is something that looks at all modes of transportation. So we're looking at the amount of traffic that's going to be produced by this project and how it relates to the roadway, looking at what it means in terms of increased delays in vehicle queuing. But also importantly was we're looking at safety. So we're looking at speed of traffic on the roadway, motor vehicle crash history at intersections, sight lines at driveways, because I know this came up as we're looking at the two access points to the property, the opportunities to develop the Main Street access as an additional access into the property. And I'll explain to you why, as we looked at that access, why, at least from our perspective, we didn't recommend it to be developed unless there were specific things that could be undertaken there. And that deals with some of the safety issues that we've evaluated as a part of the transportation study. I think as you heard from the architectural perspective as well as the site design, the first thing that's important to us is we have to understand existing conditions. So we work very closely with the town, MassDOT, the Cape Cod Commission to understand existing conditions on the roadway, but also to understand what do they want to see assessed as a part of this transportation study. So we work closely with them at the beginning to understand the parameters of the transportation assessment to be prepared. One of the conclusions of the study, and we'll talk about how we arrived at this conclusion, is that the construction of this project will not result in a significant increase in delays or vehicle queuing at intersections, and I'll mention that in a minute. But I think what I want to carefully preface that is to say that that doesn't mean traffic's free-flowing, especially during the summer months. And one of the things we look at is summer month conditions. As you heard, we measured traffic conditions in July. But what we're talking about is how does the project impact those conditions? So if you have a large backup of traffic at Queen Anne and 124, let's say, how does the project impact if there's 10 vehicles stacked up there today trying to get out of the traffic signal in the summer months? How many more cars are going to be waiting there? Because if you arrive at that intersection after the project's built, you're going to expect there's going to be a few more cars in front of you. So we're measuring what that dynamic is in terms of the change of the traffic at the intersection. And what we concluded is that there will be an increase in delay. That's going to translate into increased backups at the intersections. But what you'd experience versus what you have out there today, you're probably going to have up to about 4 cars additional in front of you during peak summertime conditions. You may wait an additional 15 seconds or so at specific intersections, but that's the order of magnitude of what we're saying the project's impact it would be. But again, it recognizes the fact that if you're trying to get out of Queen Anne onto 24 to get up to Route 6 in the summertime, it's congested. It's going to take you a few light cycles in some cases to get through there. So that's acknowledged in the traffic study itself. All movements exiting the project's driveway, we want to make sure that it operates efficiently. It does. The single point of access onto Queen Anne Road is sufficient to accommodate what's being predicted for the volume of traffic with 1 lane in, 1 lane out. The secondary access is important for emergency access, just given the depth of the site that you see. So that's important, but the secondary access is not required to disperse traffic. And we can use the single point of access for to enter and exit the project site itself. From a safety perspective, we work with the police department to understand motor vehicle crashes on the roadways and at specific intersections that we studied, and we'll talk about those intersections in a minute. What we look at in terms of crashes at intersections is we look at the number of crashes that happen based on the volume of traffic that's going through the intersection. So if you have more traffic going through an intersection, I think you'd expect that there's more interaction, so there's more crashes. So what we want to see is the number of crashes in relation to the volume of traffic going through the intersection. The state and the Cape Cod Commission actually publish information so that we can look at, how many crashes would you expect at an intersection with a certain volume of traffic? And we can look to see if the number of crashes that are happening is above what would be expected, and that would suggest that, there's a safety issue, and we would want to address anything that might be related to causing the crashes at those locations. As we looked at the intersections around the project site, all of the intersections had a crash rate that was below what would be expected based on the volume of traffic. It doesn't mean there's not crashes happening, but it means the number of crashes that are occurring is what would be expected at similar type of intersections along the roadway. So there's nothing disproportionate in terms of the crash history. Lastly is safety is sight lines at the driveway. So we looked at lines of sight both at Queen Anne, the driveway there, as well as out at Main Street. The Queen Anne driveway has superior sight lines. There's sight lines of exceeding 500 feet in all directions based on the speed that people are driving as they approach the driveway, which I think is probably the more significant issue that we would see needs to be addressed. Posted 30 miles an hour, most people are going closer to 40. So it's a 10-mile-an-hour discrepancy in that speed, and that's not something that we really want to see on a roadway. What I would say is that the sight lines that are there exceed what's required for someone approaching that intersection at 40 miles an hour. So it means it can function in a safe manner at a speed that is at 40 miles an hour, but that's not what we think is desirable. And we'd like to see, and possibly as a part of the project, look at ways that we can achieve speed reductions on the roadway. Go to the next slide. So this slide just shows the context of the project site, and I think you've seen this on some of the slides. I think importantly, as you look at it, as it relates to transportation, you can see how it relates to Route 6 on the north part of the slide, if I'm looking at it correctly on the screen here. To the right, as I'm looking at it, would be 124, and then the interchange just to the north of that with Route 6. Queen Anne Road is hard to see, but I think what you can see on here, just to orient yourself, is you can see the big solar field where the transfer station is, so that'll kind of give you some orientation. And then, of course, Main Street to the south of the project. And I'm going to remove that photograph and now show you the study area, which this slide here shows the study area that we evaluate as a part of the project. So you can see it's essentially Queen Anne Road and Main Street stretching from Depot Street all the way out to 124. And then as you look at Main Street, all the way down to Great Western Road. That's the study area that we evaluated as a part of the assessment. This study area is defined based on the amount of traffic the project's going to be produced, because we're always asked, well, how did you pick these intersections? There's actually some definition to the study area as we evaluate it. The state and the Cape Cod Commission require that we look at any intersection where the project would add more than 100 vehicle trips during any one peak hour of the day, or where the traffic would be increased by 5% or more. So if you are exceeding any one of those parameters, then what it would generally say is that you're going to have an impact from the project. You want to measure it and then define what those impacts may be. This study area encompasses that definition for locations where we would have a 5% or more increase in traffic, and where the project would add more than 100 vehicle trips to any one of these intersections. We'll talk about the amount of traffic the project's going to be produced in a minute. The other thing I wanted to mention on this slide is it shows where there are pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure available in the area. And I think what's stark, and I think what you all know, is there's no sidewalks in the vicinity of the project site. So there's not sidewalks along Queen Anne. You have to go all the way out to Depot Street to have a sidewalk. There is opportunities, you had mentioned, of the trails within the project site, but you can see where the Cape Cod Rail Trail is in relation to the project. So that back entrance out to Main Street would provide some opportunities to connect up to the bicycle system that exists in the area there. So it's an opportunity, but not directly connected to the project site. But again, as we talk about opportunities for implementing improvements, this may be an improvement to be able to develop some connectivity to get out to these the bicycle facilities and develop sidewalks along Queen Anne that we can then connect into as a part of the project. So this slide shows the traffic characteristics of the project, and what I've shown here, I've shown there's actually 3 columns on this slide here. If you focus on column A, that's the amount of traffic the project as currently proposed is expected to generate. Column B is the numbers that we used in the traffic study. When the traffic study was undertaken, it was a larger project. It was around 290 to 300 residential units, which has now come down to about 248 units. So what's shown in this is really the difference between what we assessed in the traffic study and what is currently being proposed. But if we focus on column A, this is the amount of traffic we're expecting that the current development proposal at 248 units would produce. The larger number that you see at the top, which is 1904, that's the daily traffic number. So if you stood at the entrance to the project at Queen Anne and you counted everything that goes in and out of the site, includes FedEx, UPS, Amazon, any type of vehicle that would be required to service a residential project, this is the number that you'd arrive at. Half go in, half go out. The total is 1,904. Now, to put that in context, Queen Anne Road at the project site, under non-summer month conditions, it's about 5,000 vehicles per day go by the site. During the summertime, that number goes up to about 7,000 vehicles per day during that time period. So this 1904 is that you would relate that to 5,000 under average conditions, non-summer, 7,000 vehicles during summer month conditions. So that's how these numbers would relate to what's on the roadway today. The next two numbers, the first number, 155, that's the amount of traffic that we predict would be produced during 1 hour period in the morning. So this is when you think about if you're dropping your kids off at school or if you're commuting to work, during that 1 hour when the traffic volume is the highest on Queen Anne Road, we will be adding about 155 vehicles on top of what's already out there today. Today, the traffic volume going by the site during the morning time period, it's close to 400 to 500 vehicles going by the site. So the 155 will get added to that number. The next number, the 183, that's in the evening. So this is you're coming home from work. And it's a 1 hour period between 4 and 6 in the evening, because that's when the traffic volumes on Queen Anne are the highest. We'll be adding about 183 vehicles on top of the volume of traffic that's out there today. The evening numbers are higher. Morning numbers on Queen Anne are lower. The evening numbers are closer to 600 to 700 vehicles going by the site, so we'd be adding this number to that. So once we've estimated the amount of traffic that the project's going to be producing, we need to then add it to that study area that I had shown that we had looked at. And what this shows is what we've termed trip dispersal. So the 155 vehicles during the morning, the 183 in the evening, once it comes out to the driveway on Queen Anne, this is how it disperses itself onto the roadway. And what you see is the majority of that traffic is oriented to and from the east, so it's heading toward Route 124, and then going through that intersection, the most of that traffic is then heading up towards Route 6. The rest of the traffic we'll term as more localized traffic, and that's dispersed between Depot Street as well as down to Great Western Road as well. Some of the questions that we had in looking at this was people suggesting, local knowledge during the summertime says this isn't how I'm going to use these roadways, and I'll use some more localized routes. When you look at the numbers that are here, this is really your typical daily traffic for commuters. If you're trying to go shopping or something and I'm not going out to 124 because it's so congested that I'm going to use an alternative route, you'll do that as you get your local knowledge, but what we're really looking at is where the traffic would be most concentrated, and I think that's probably the best way to look at this, is so general commuting traffic, this is how we expect the traffic pattern would be. And one of the reasons why, as I mentioned on the initial slide about delays not increasing at intersections by any more than 15 seconds and queues not increasing by any more than 4 vehicles during the peak time periods is because of this dispersal. Because not all of that traffic shows up instantaneously at any one of the intersections. It's dispersed between all of the intersections within the study area itself. So after we've done this assessment and looked at the impacts of the project, we have a series of recommendations. I won't go through each one of these, but what this really deals with is the recommendations as they relate to the design of the project. And I think, as you heard the site engineer mention, as they've carefully designed the project and the roadway network, they've considered all of these recommendations. So as you look at the plans that have been put together, these are all a part of those plans. One of the things, as I had mentioned, is that as we looked at safety evaluations and sight lines specifically at the driveways, the Main Street driveway does have limitations on its sight lines. So as you're coming, if you were to come out of the Main Street driveway, look to the left or right, there are obstructions. There's fences, there's vegetations. Those physical features limit the sight lines at that intersection. They limit it to the extent that we've suggested you would either need to modify those obstructions, physically remove them and get them out of the way of where the sight lines would be, or restrict the access to emergency vehicles. So right now, the way that we've looked at this is saying, right now it needs to be restricted to emergency vehicles only and pedestrians and bicycles, just because of the fact that if we had general traffic trying to exit out that way, you wouldn't have the proper sight lines along Main Street to see a vehicle that's approaching you. So that's why one of the recommendations that we had, and that's why you don't see that being advanced as a part of the site plan effort that's taken place. Lastly, as I mentioned, the signalized intersection at 124, that intersection, specifically during the summer months, it is operating over capacity, meaning that we have specific movements that have long delays, one of those being the Queen Anne Road approach, the other being if you're trying to make a left traveling northbound on 124 to try to get onto Queen Anne, it's extended delay and queuing associated with that. So what we did look at is whether there's opportunities to retime that traffic signal to operate more efficiently, to reduce the delays at that intersection. So that is something that would be implemented as a part of the project. The implementation of that timing changes at the intersection. As you heard, the project's going to be phased. The phasing of the project provides, again, another opportunity in that as we're looking at retiming that traffic signal by constructing the project in phases, you don't get all of that traffic at the same time. It's not like it all gets built at once, all of the traffic is out there. What it does allow to happen is you build the project, the traffic gets added to the roadway network, and then as we're looking at retiming the traffic signal, we can go out there and address the conditions for the first phase, the second phase, the third phase. So there's opportunities to make changes to the transportation system, and especially the traffic signal, to accommodate the realized traffic from each of the phases of the project. So that is a summary of the transportation assessment. I'm sure there's a lot of questions related to traffic and transportation, and I will be here to answer those. I know I have some from the previous session that was held, and I think I've worked some of those into the discussion that I've had here as a part of my presentation, but I'll be here to answer the rest of them. So thank you, and I appreciate your attention.
Thank you so much, Jeff. That was really informative. So one of the reasons Pine Oaks 1, 2, and 3 is so successful is our property managers, who we've had a long time. It is Hall Keen Management, and I've asked them to talk about their role in maintaining Pine Oaks 4 and as well as some of the issues with the lottery and things like that. I'd like to welcome Tracy Glassman to start.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you, everybody, for coming out this evening. I'd like to first introduce my team. I have Alicia Pollard, who is our Director of Marketing, and she's going to be talking about the lease-up process and lottery. We have April Palomini, and she will be talking about the management plan for the on-site team. And Janelle Satterwhite is our Director of Community Relations, and she will be talking about the services that are provided currently at our Pine Oaks properties and how that will roll over into the new property. So we've been on Cape Cod since 1980, and that relationship started with the Pine Oaks group through MB Management, and that was run by Steve Roberts, who had a close association with Greg Winston. In the early 1990s, MB Management merged with Hall Keen Management, and therefore we took on those properties and we continue to manage today, as well as several other properties throughout Cape Cod. We have properties up and down the coast, from the northeast down to the southeast, about 11 different states. Probably, I want to say 6,800 units, 85 properties. We specialize in affordable housing. We do a myriad of programs, workforce housing, LIHTC, low-income housing tax credits, state and federal. We do Section 8, everything out there, basically, we have properties. We also have market rate properties and some commercial units as well. We like to incorporate the community. We hire locally. We also look for women and minority-owned businesses. We are looking for companies and vendors. That's very important for us. So we try to really integrate the community, and we look for feedback on that as well. Our corporate office is in Norwood, and we have about 65 people that work there. We have a full-scale accounting group, I apologize. Our compliance department is there. They help us make sure that we're following all the government regulations and the IRS regulations pertaining to the programs on site for the affordability. We also have a human resources department at the corporate office who helps us with our staffing needs at the property. And I will pass on to whoever would like to go next.
Hi, I'm April Palomini, and I've been involved with Pine Oaks for at least 20 years. I came over from MB Management, so have a long-standing relationship with the board and look forward to this project. As far as the employees go, I would be overseeing this property as a regional level employee. We would have on-site management staff, on-site maintenance staff, and on-site resident services. So Alicia and Janelle can talk a little bit more about the resident services and the leasing portions.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming out. My name is Janelle Satterwhite, and I am the Director of Community Relations for Holkeen Management. I've actually worked at Holkeen for the past 18 years, and I've been involved in with Pine Oaks in some capacity for the past 10. So what we do is we provide resident services for the residents of Pine Oaks 1 through 3. Currently, we have 18 service coordinators that operate in 11 states. We have service coordinators that actually take care of residents at a third of our properties. At Pine Oaks, we have a special relationship and concentration on combating isolation and helping folks age in place. We do that with supportive services, health and wellness programming, social and cultural programming, as well as tenant stabilization and resident retention. We have a service coordinator at Pine Oaks 1 through 3 who has been there for the past 10 years. In the last year, she has saved residents of Pine Oaks roughly $10,000 through efforts in healthcare management as well as combating food insecurity. So we plan to actually transition all of those services and expand them to Pine Oaks 4. Pine Oaks 4 will be a different demographic. It will be younger families in workforce housing. So we will work with them to develop personalized individual programming based on what their needs are, as well as programming for the entire community. We're very excited about the project, and if you have any questions, we'd be happy to answer them at the end. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Alicia Pollard, and I am the Director of Marketing for Holkeen Management. I help oversee our lease-ups for Holkeen, including Pine Oaks 4. All residents of this community will be chosen through a lottery. Our lottery process will begin 6 months in advance. We'll start the advertising in different media that will consist of online, apartments.com, Zillow. We'll also do some newspaper advertising as well, and also incorporate some social media. All applications for the lottery will come into our in-house compliance department. During that time, our compliance department will hold a public info session where the public can come, log in virtually, and ask questions about the process. The application period is open for 60 days. At the end of the application period, we hold a number of pools of lottery. So one of those pools will be the local preference. 70% of the project will be chosen for the local, have priority for the local Harwich residents. So residents or residents that have children in the schools or folks that work in the Harwich area. So we'll have the pool for the local preference, and then we'll have the general pool as well. If a local preference is not chosen, those numbers go into the general lottery. And then if a number is not placed in the 50 units, it goes into a wait list. At the end of the lottery, we process the applications, and we get everyone ready to move into their homes. And I will pass it back to Tracy.
Thank you. So if you have any questions on the lottery, we're happy to answer those at the end. I just want to wrap up by saying we have a commitment to all of our properties. As you can see, we've been with this property group since the 1980s. We work with a wonderful board that have an array of vast knowledge and commitment to not only Harwich, but Pine Oaks Village itself. So I appreciate everybody coming out tonight and learning about the property, and also, just affordable housing, because it's such a major topic that we all need to address. So I appreciate you. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. And one of the questions, of course, we do get is there a waiting list for Pine Oaks 1, 2, and 3? Yes, it's 3 to 5 years to get in. So what I often tell people is if they're planning ahead and maybe say, oh, I'm going to want to downsize, but not for 3 years maybe, go ahead and sign up on the list, because by the time you're ready, you may be, your number may be up very close to that. The other thing I'd like to comment on is that the size of the property, a lot of concern about how big it is, but one of the advantages of that is that like our social services and our on-site management, we can have much more depth. We, not just one person or a half-time person, have a full-time person or more. So you just get a lot better depth on the services with a little slightly larger project. So I think we've come to question time.
Who gets what?
We hand them out to all our different engineers and architects and yeah.
You gotta stay.
So Jim.
What about Jonathan?
No,
Jonathan, get up, talk. He may have some in there. Multiple questions.
he's a general.
You did such a good job.
Yeah.
But this is the question that came from the last session.
Sure. Yeah. So one of the questions from before was about our calculation of our units. There is a difference that we use the statistical information from that study to come up with our count of 208 or whatever. And the town has made a different estimate. I think it was around 270 or 280. And I don't know what they used for a calculation, but it could be either, could be legitimate. I actually don't know at this point, and that will come out probably in the appeal, what is it? The next step, ZBA, CBA, and that's the opportunity for people to come out and ask questions of the ZBA. If you have concerns, traffic, size, and everything, that's where you're going to have your next input to influence that decision by the ZBA. So let's start off. Who wants to start? Jim, let's have you start.
Let's see, how do rentals build personal equity? Rent draws from personal income with nothing to show for it. Build to own, not rentals. I see for people who are looking to build equity, I think you start by building up a down payment, and I think what you wind up doing is by having a rental that you can afford, where you're spending no more than 30% of your income on the rent. That would give you an opportunity to start saving so that then you could move on. We have as a group had some discussion about home ownership, and there may be a time at some point in the future when we may start thinking about that, but our focus in terms of how we do it is more on the rental side. Let's see. Excuse me. I think somebody had asked a question about rental rates, let's say for a two-bedroom at the 50% AMI level, the rent would be $1,423 a month. That would be reduced by, if there's, to the extent there are utilities that are paid by the tenant, that would actually reduce the rent below that amount. So I think that it basically, if you just said 30% of whatever your income is, in effect, is a good estimate of where you would wind up being. How will you access Safety Road after the, well, that's, I'm going to skip that question and turn that over to Jeffrey, but can you guarantee that the apartments are affordable and low income will not move up in 5 to 10 years so they will no longer be able to afford the unit? The rents are, the rent levels are established by HUD in terms of what the limits are, and that's based upon the area median income. So if the area median income goes up, the rent goes up by the same, roughly the same percentage. Now, in cases where we have someone whose income doesn't keep up, one of the good things is we have a number of tiers. In other words, if someone starts out at a 50% unit, but their income doesn't keep up, then we can shift them perhaps to a 30% unit. And some of those, a small number of the apartments will come with rental assistance, where if somebody has whatever their income is, they pay 30% period. If they have no income, they don't pay anything. So that, and that, you know, we have to be very, you know, very careful with that, that sort of approach. But for people who need it, for example, they're, you know, disabled people or people who are very, you know, low income and unable to have an income, it's very important. Will most of the tenants be given to Harwich residents? As one of the folks from Hall Keene mentioned, we have a preference for Harwich residents for up to 70% of the apartments. And 70% is a limit that the state sets. And in fact, we have to ask for that. They don't always give it, but I can say whenever I've asked for it, I have been fortunate to get it, but it also depends on the town being supportive of the development financially and otherwise. Can you build small individual homes that our young folks can own and have equity? Again, we're thinking about that. I might add, it's hard to finance home ownership that's affordable. The cost of construction is so high nowadays, it makes it very difficult. I have done some, or had some in a mixture with some market rate and some lower level. So again, the board may, you know, has talked about it, would perhaps like to do it at some point, but we're not in a, you know, we're not considering that at this point. With regard to what affordable means, I think it all ties into area median income and what percentage and what tier. So it's fairly hard for me to explain, you know, what it is that, but maybe I can see if I have an example. Well, an example, let's say a medical assistant who makes $42,000 a year would typically be able to afford a rent of $1,050 according to this calculation. So our objective is that there's an apartment that they can rent for that level. Likewise, a police officer maybe who makes $65,000 could afford $1,630. It's that kind of a that's the sort of thing, you know, that we're thinking. Let's see. If you plan on bringing in low and medium income families, wouldn't you assume there would be more than 17 children per year? I think that we'll be bringing in a mixture of all kinds of people. You know, we'll have certainly, you know, we've got 1 bedrooms. I expect those will be, you know, single people. We have 2 and 3 bedrooms. So we'll have, I do expect we'll have a number of people with kids, but keep in mind, this is also school-age children that I was talking about when I said we're calculating 69 is based on the methodology from that report. basically takes into account the fact that, 3-year-old kids aren't going to be going to school yet, and that some of the families, as their kids grow and they manage to save some money, they'll be able to buy a house. As their income grows up, they may move out, et cetera. Let's see, next question I've got is, will construction use all union labor? We're not restricted to using union labor for this. I can guarantee you the workers will be well paid, but we're not necessarily saying absolutely union labor. Let's see, will landscaping use fertilizers and pesticides? I think I can say we'll use natural materials, but rather than harsh chemicals. But I'm not a particular expert on that. So, and how do you propose to protect the Herring River? I think that I'm going to pass that on to Rich when he comes up. What will the Harwich taxpayer contribution be? We will be requesting some funding from the Harwich Affordable Housing Trust. So that's something that, is that we'll be asking for. And the other is, as Bob could probably explain better than I, but typically with affordable housing is worth less money than market rate housing of the same, if we built the exact same building and it was market rate, because our rents are lower and because the value to an investor is the value of whatever the income is, the net income of the property. So as a result of that, I would anticipate that we would pay less in taxes for that building, and this ultimately is a benefit to the residents in the sense of being able to keep covering the regular operating expenses. Will all residents be Harwich legal residents? Well, they will after they move in. And as I mentioned, we do have the preference for people who are residents of Harwich or who work here or have children in school here. Are categories of applicants prioritized? Apart from the preference, we have a couple of preferences, but there will be some apartments that are set aside for disabled people and that sort of thing. Not too many of them, but a small number. And certainly in the initial lottery, we'll have the preference for Harwich residents. Apart from that, they're only categorized in the sense of your income bracket is here, and you need a 2-bedroom, and so you're in that kind of category. But that's really nothing that. Let's see, the number of students, I think I mentioned that 69 is what we're anticipating. I think we covered the rental rate. I think that is it for now. I hope I answered your questions. And I could go for Rich.
One thing.
Yeah.
I think the people from Paul Keene might be able to help us out. When you were talking about local preference, people are very concerned about local preference.
Mm-hmm.
We just did a study at Pioneer Villages 1, 2, and 3, and we came up with about 95% of our residents at local connections.
Oh, that's even more than it used to be.
Yeah.
To be precise, the local preference, the official local preference, is for the initial lottery, and so that chances. So we'll wind up with 70%, of our occupants with a local connection. Because we're here in Harwich, because Harwich people know about it, and so on. Over time, at the other Pine Oaks villages, they're just saying they're over 95% of local Harwich people, and that's without any official preference. So that's what will tend to happen over the course of time, even without that preference. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Just want to clarify on that last point. A lot of these people that had connections with Harwich For instance, we have a lot of people that grew up, went to school here, and now they would like to come back to Harwich. And those are the kind of people that come into Pine Oaks 1, 2, and 3. Who's going to be next?
I have a couple here related to wastewater and sewer. The first one asked, does your design have plans for conversion to the sewer when it comes to this side of the town? And the answer is we have met with I think it was at the time, the sewer commissioner, the DPW director, and talked about the sewer. We talked about where it might pass by the site, and the timing did not, it seemed to be quite a bit in the future based on that discussion when it would actually come by. It'd be on the Main Street side, it seemed more likely to come through. So we have had that discussion. It wouldn't be terribly difficult if we had to switch and connect to sewer in the future. Everything is coming to where the wastewater plant is now, so we would just, from there, we would have to pump to wherever the sewer connection is. There was a question about the kilowatt capacity for the EV systems. I don't know that question. That's probably more for our mechanical engineers that would be designing it, but in my experience, it's usually fed off the buildings, and it's not a huge draw off the system, but I think the mechanical engineers would probably... no, the EV chargers, I believe. The actual electric kilowatt capacity. So we could probably follow up with that. Yeah. Some are dual chargers, some are multi-vehicle chargers. And then there's a question, concerns regarding the water supply to this site. And there's already been water bans in Harwich almost annually. And I can say that we have met, again, we talked with the town about the connection to the water. There's a water main in Queen Anne Road and a water main on Main Street. And I didn't touch on it in the talk, but we're planning to connect off of Queen Anne, loop through the site, and connect back out the emergency access road to Main Street, because the towns, they like looped connection, and that helps with just the whole community's water supply. As far as concerns regarding a ban, I don't expect this would have irrigation associated with it, so I think the bans usually are for like outdoor irrigation, typically, not like the drinking water piece. So I would think that they would obviously not irrigate if there's any, and it would just be the demand for any supply. There will be, once we get into the more detailed design, there'll be hydrant flow tests, they call them. So they'll go out, and they might have already actually happened, where they test the pressure in the water systems and make sure that it's going to be adequate for the buildings. And if they have to make modifications to the buildings, they do it inside the building to provide the right fire protection service. And those are the two I had.
Joe, sorry, septic system and fee schedule levels in the Herring River, that's a concern.
So I can go back. Let's see if I can do this. Should I try this again? So here we go. Maybe I can advance it. There we go. Let me go back to the site plan, and I can just do a quick, actually I can probably use this. So just to give a general idea, the water, so we have to do a hydrogeologic study for the wastewater plant. So we have to look at the hydrogeology of the whole area, the flow of groundwater, where the effluent from the wastewater plant would be going. There'll be monitoring wells installed around the effluent disposal field that'll have to be monitored on a monthly basis and have to meet, I believe it's like 10 milligrams per liter or less total nitrogen. So, but the water flow, the groundwater regional flow is kind of in this direction here. So our wastewater plant is somewhere in that area, so the flow is, I would estimate it's in that direction based on information we have. So whether it's contributing to the Herring River, maybe I'll let Rich take that piece.
So I have a couple of questions, and I'll start with the Herring River question. It's a good question, and it's a fairly complicated answer, but the question is related to Joe's. This site will discharge both runoff from rainfall that runs off after it rains on these stormwater control measures, will drain into the ground and ultimately go to groundwater, and the wastewater treatment system will go into groundwater, and the direction of flow is towards the Herring River and ultimately to the southwest and discharging to Nantucket Sound ultimately as it goes out in that direction. The important components are advanced stormwater treatment and advanced wastewater treatment to the point where you would expect to see much better treatment for your sewage with an advanced wastewater treatment plant than if you were to put single-family houses on there and put them in septic systems. About 4 times, or maybe even 5 times, the effluent from a septic system is 40 milligrams per liter. These numbers, Joe said a maximum of 10 milligrams per liter, so that's 1/4. And it's as good a treatment as you can get. It's also not up to the homeowner to maintain. It's up to a professional wastewater operator. So you get a much better operation. You have much better oversight by the state permitting agencies, DEP, and you just get a much more reliable treatment of pollutants associated with wastewater. Our stormwater design is as good as you're going to get in any location. It has, and Joe talked about this, it has a pre-treatment component with a surface treatment using biological processes, and then it uses the natural terrain to manage the overflows for large storms. So there'll be zero runoff coming down Queen Anne Road or Main Street during big storms from this site. It'll all stay on site. It will slowly infiltrate through natural soils and through the underlying soils, and that cleans up the pollutants that you get from runoff from impervious surfaces. We're not taking questions from the audience. We're not taking questions from the audience. Write the question down. We will answer them and send it to you. The measures to protect a river like the Herring River are to do a combination of maximizing the preservation of natural areas, don't disturb near it, maintain the buffers around the wetlands. All of the buffers to this project are outside of the regulated buffers by the local conservation commission. So you allow the natural terrain to do its job, and you don't have discharge of polluted runoff coming off of a site, either during construction or after construction. And importantly, this project will be going before the Zoning Board of Appeals. They're going to ask the same amount of questions. They're going to ask for proof of what I'm telling you is correct, and likely have a third-party peer reviewer review it. So I suspect you're going to have an opportunity to ask those questions again and to get a definitive answer in the public forum. One person asked about a question about the 10-year time frame and whether or not that's going to be a disturbance for the neighbors, like you're going to have a construction site for 10 years, and what are the construction hours during this period. A typical phase project like this is built in phases. The work hours for the first phase are typical work hours. No construction before 7:30 in the morning based on the zoning, and ending by like 3 o'clock or 8 o'clock, 8 a.m. to 3:30. Those are typical work hours. They rarely work on weekends or rarely work on holidays. It's typical work hours. They build the phase, and then it's not like you jump right into the next phase. The projects have a lag time between each phase. So while it'll take years for a project to do this, there's going to be people living in the first phase. So not only are your neighbors around the project a concern, but the people living in the project that move into the first phases. So mitigation measures for sound, construction duration, dust control, traffic, construction traffic, all of those things have to be managed accordingly. Projects such as this are frequently built in communities, and one of the advantages of this site is a significant buffer to the residential properties. The 25-foot minimum that Joe talked about is a pretty small number. The big number is we have large buffer areas around the disturbed areas. I think, one last question about parking spaces. I'll try to do that. Are the parking spaces provided going to be adequate both for the residents and visitors? The site has a parking ratio of approximately 1.6 spaces per unit, a combination of off-street parking lots and on-street parallel parking. The off-street parking spaces or in the parking lots will generally be assigned to the tenants, so you'll have an assigned parking space, and the on-street parking would generally be available for visitors and for other tenants. Our experience on Cape Cod with affordable housing projects, including younger families, is that the 1.6 number is more than adequate to meet the demands both of the residents and visitors. And this question also will be brought up at the ZBA during the permitting process, and the data both from us, traffic consultants on what is the required or needed parking to meet the demand will be addressed further.
Let's have some parking questions. Yeah, I'm sorry, traffic questions. Jeff?
So I probably have the largest number of cards, so I tried to break these up into subject areas so that the comments really are, there's 3 subject areas primarily. One is the traffic study itself and some of the parameters as they relate to, what did we undertake as a part of the study. The second thing is access to the property, and then the last is what we call mitigation or improvements associated with the project. So in terms of the traffic study itself, starting with what were the times and days and dates that the traffic study was undertaken. So the times of day that, well, let's start with the dates. So all of the traffic counts were done in July of 2023. And I can give you the exact dates, but I believe it was mid-July that the traffic counts were done. We perform our traffic counts on what's known as an average weekday, so it's either Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. Traffic volumes on Monday are lower than they are on Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday. They're actually lower and a little bit abnormal in terms of traffic flows on Fridays, so we don't count on Mondays. We don't count on Fridays for those reasons. The other reason why we don't count on Mondays is that if you look at work from home phenomena, everyone works from home on Monday, so the traffic volumes are very low. People tend to go into the office if they have to be there 3 or 4 days a week, Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday. And then Friday is also a low day compared to the rest of the days of the week. So that's another reason why we don't do traffic counts on Mondays and Fridays. So again, time periods of when we did the counts, it was actually mid-month in July. The time periods that we looked at were a Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday, so a midweek condition. And when we were talking about the traffic volumes, what we're measuring, we do two types of measurements. One is a daily traffic count, so we measure traffic volumes 24 hours a day for multiple days over the course of the week so that we can look at traffic flows and speed of traffic along Queen Anne in particular. And then at each of the intersections, we also look at those peak time periods, so it's 7 to 9 in the morning, and then in the evening, 4 to 6 is what we're looking at in terms of traffic flows through the intersection. So those are the time periods and when the data collection was undertaken at the intersections. There were several questions about projects that we include in the traffic study. So one was I know hopefully pronounce this right, is the Marceline development. Marseille. So that was included, the traffic volumes from that project were included in our future traffic volume projections. The other one was what was called the South Dennis Housing Project. So that's the Love Lane conversion of the assisted living to residential housing at that location. So I was actually the traffic engineer for that project. That project came after the traffic study was prepared for this development. I will go back and look and see what we had estimated for traffic volumes at that intersection in terms of a net increase compared to what the nursing home generated, because that was really the focus of the transportation analysis, which was how much additional traffic will the residential conversion cause in relation to the nursing home itself. Questions about the study area as well, and I just think in particular as it relates to the study area, I was looking at the impacts at the Route 6 interchange with Route 124 and how the project would impact delays at that intersection. There's been discussion tonight about the process that the project will need to undertake. One of those is going to the Zoning Board of Appeals. The traffic study will be submitted to them for review and comment. And I think as you look at and gather all of the information that you've heard tonight, some of these suggestions as to, we really think you should look at specific intersections that were not included in what you see in the traffic study. Those are the kind of comments we want to hear and should be brought to the zoning board, because this study area can be expanded to look at additional intersections. I mentioned why we looked at the intersections we looked at, but that doesn't mean that there's not intersections that are of concern to you that may not have been captured in the traffic study. And so that's the kind of feedback that we need, but the zoning board also needs, so then we can just add additional intersections to the study area. So I think that captures the comments as they relate to the parameters and what we had assessed in the traffic study. So the next grouping of comments dealt with the access into the project. So as I mentioned, there's 2 access points into the property. As we looked at those 2 access points, because of the sightline limitations on the driveway out on Main Street, we couldn't recommend, at least at this time, that be developed as a full access into the property. To the extent that some improvements can be made to address the sightlines at that intersection, then I think that's something that can be evaluated. But until such time as that's kind of brought forward as to that we can address those sightline limitations, we can't recommend that be used for anything other than pedestrians, bicycles, and emergency vehicles until that gets addressed. And then the last set of comments have to do with the mitigation. What I think I want to stress is that the mitigation, as we term it, construction of improvements at specific intersections, additions of sidewalks along Queen Anne, that's not, I want to be clear, some of those improvements will be done as a part of the project, and that'll be defined as a part of the zoning board process. The other set of improvements are something that possibly a scenario could be where the design of the improvements is undertaken as a part of the project, or those grant applications I had mentioned would be done as a part of the project to facilitate obtaining those grants. But the intent is, again, to stress that no municipal funds to be expended on these improvements. That's not what the intent is. The intent is to come up with a package of improvements that can be funded through the project or through grant applications, and the developer facilitating those grant applications, but in no way is it intended that the town addresses the impacts on this project. We're responsible for addressing those impacts. So that will be clear. Improvements at the Main Street Queen Anne intersection and the challenges that exist there. That's come up as a couple of comments, as well as a gentleman mentioning that to me as well. That intersection is it's challenging from a number of respects. As we looked at it, if we didn't look at the topography of the intersection or the bend in the road that's there, the stop sign's in the wrong place because the majority of the traffic is Queen Anne heading to Depot, and you're stopping that traffic. The reason the traffic's being stopped, as you probably all know, is because the intersection is very awkward in its geometry, and the sight lines are very poor. And so you stop the Queen Anne traffic because the sight lines are poor. One of the things that we can look at is how improvements might be able to be made at that intersection, and maybe there's some things that we can do as a part of the project. I think there's a larger infrastructure improvement because we've got horizontal and vertical challenges at that intersection, but maybe there's a plan that we can develop, again, toward a short-term measure that the project might be able to implement, and then a long-term measure that could be done as a part of the grant application. Whereas we're talking about those grant applications, typically what happens is plans are developed as a part of this process. So the developer prepares these plans, the grant, and that allows us to say how much it would cost to build these improvements. It also demonstrates they're feasible. Community input is a part of those plans, as well as town input as a part of the zoning board process. And then we apply for the grant application. So I think it all gets flushed out as a process similar to this. But again, the intent is improvements get made, but those improvements are done at no cost to the community. So that's what the intent is. So I think that's mostly the grouping of the comments that we have. If you have additional comments, I know some of these you've asked for email responses, so I think we'll work those through with the town as well. So if I didn't answer a specific question you have and you ask for an email response, I'll work to put that together to get that to you. And then hopefully it can be a two-way communication as well. If you have follow-up communication or questions, we can kind of work those through the team. So thank you.
I'm going to cover just a couple that keep coming up. One is about the taxes. The town does have a program where any organization, profit or nonprofit, do get appraised at 50% of the value. Therefore, the effect is you pay 50% of the taxes. It's not unique to us. It's for anybody that does it, including the West Harwich School, which is a for-profit organization. But it's part of what they feel is responsibility of the town to help support affordable housing. A lot of concerns about that this isn't a forum that everybody can get up and speak. This is strictly information, putting out information and talking with why we're doing things. You definitely have an opportunity to go to the ZBA and express your concerns. That includes, why is it North Harwich? And yeah, I don't believe your traffic numbers. The town is doing their own survey, so that they'll have different numbers, maybe they'll be the same. Let's see, I think minor question is the storage facility. Yes, the townhouses have a storage shed, and the flats will have basement storage at cages, so everybody will have that. Pet friendly, yeah. I think there's cats and limitation on size of dogs, but I believe that's all accommodated for. So let's, yeah.
All right, I'll try to make it quick. Everybody's probably getting a little tired. This is a zoning question. Your building has too many stories and is over height. How many variances will we be asking for? That is the main, as far as I see it, that is the main variance. The other one being that there is the minimum square footage per unit. We're slightly under that when you combine all three buildings in phase one, and that's because the footprint of the buildings is very small. Zoning-wise, we're way under how much of the lot we're taking up, but we're building densely, so each unit does not have that much square footage per unit. I will say, and we definitely encourage everyone to come to the zoning board hearing, assuming we get on the calendar, that would probably be in January. This is a 40B project, and that means that as long as the town of Harwich is under 10% affordable units, the 40B process is a process that allows developers and designers to move through the zoning process efficiently and not necessarily be constricted to the zoning code in the particular zoning district that you are building. And I think we need to make that very clear. That said, we're trying to be very sensitive to the zoning in that district. As you saw from that chart, we're hitting the notes in most ways. The next two questions I'm going to put together: have you driven through Harwich? Where do you see the architecture that you propose? And what about building small individual Cape-style houses in a circuit of small side streets and cul-de-sacs on the 30 acres for teachers, nurses, police? I want to say, if we can find, perfect. It's my strong belief that the project that we're proposing is a neighborhood and has a very strong neighborhood feel. It's walkable. The townhouses in particular have individual entrances at every single unit off of the street. As far as many small Cape-style houses dotted throughout the landscape, affordable housing has to be built affordably. And to be very frank, that would probably be economically infeasible for this team. This is a nonprofit developer. We're trying to do the right thing for the town by bringing affordable housing. So that was something that we considered, I think, a long time ago, but it was essentially a non-starter. I will also say that as far as sustainability and green design goes, that is not to our advantage to build small footprints all over the site, clear-cutting most of the trees, putting footprints all over the site, and not leaving nature and pushing the development to the edge of the buffer zone. So that's why we haven't considered that plan, and that's how we ended up where we are. Oh, and then a nice one to finish it out. Are there plans for a playground or other recreational considerations for the children? The answer is yes. There is a planned standalone daycare building. There's a community center building, and there are fields, and I believe a playground, correct? Yeah. Right. Pickleball? Yeah.
Will all residents be legal USA citizens or green card holders? Green card holders are legal permanent residents. Anyway, answer yes. Why a 40B project? The existing zoning would not accommodate what we are trying to do by having, as Jonathan mentioned, to try and save as much space as we could, as much natural space, and to build these affordably. Is a third floor really necessary? Yes, we had lots of discussions about that and felt that it could be done in a way that is not going to be impactful on the rest. First of all, as you walk through, it's not going to be dominating to say this big overwhelming building. And secondly, it's not going to be particularly visible off-site. And that was very important to us to stay away, as you notice, we are staying away from the street and from the neighbors. Rental term required, or can I rent for the month of July? No, you can't rent for the month of July. It's going to be but seriously, we're not converting this into an Airbnb. It's going to have a one-year lease as a minimum. Any encouragement for folks who do work locally or just anyone who can pay the rent. The initial lottery will have a preference for people who live or work or have children in schools in Harwich. And then beyond that, we are open to anyone, but as mentioned, the experience we've had at Pine Oaks 1, 2, and 3 is such that the vast majority of the apartments are rented to people who have a connection with Harwich. Do assets count? Yes, they do. I don't remember offhand in terms of how assets are counted, but in terms of the figuring your income, they will take the value of your assets, whether it's a bank account or if you have stock or something like that. They'll value it. They'll take a percentage of that. I don't remember offhand what the percentage is. It has changed, but it's maybe 2% or something in the range of that, assuming you're making income from those assets. That's it.
Thanks, Jim.
And another one that does keep coming up is about our profit. We do not profit from this. We are a nonprofit organization. Any money, residual money that does come from rents, and that doesn't come very often because we are overseen by HUD, and they're not going to let us make profits. Any money that residual does gets put right back into the properties as long-term improvements. If you think about it, we're only charging often half the rent you'd normally pay, so you still got to pay for upkeep, depreciation. There's tremendous amount of loans on this. It's not all just state and federal government. You do have to incur a lot of debt, and you have to make sure you can pay back that debt over time. The difference is sometimes it's friendly, where they say, you pay us what you come out of your money. So if you have $100 extra out of an apartment, the lender will say, okay, we're going to take half of that. And another lender says, I'll take the other half of it. But if there isn't any profit that month or that year, whatever, they'll wait and get their money later. There are a lot of questions here that we don't have time to answer, and some I can't answer. That we are going to review these and post them on our Q&A. So it'll be on our website so people can look up what other people's questions and things that we haven't answered. Anybody that gave an email, we will respond to them personally. I think that's about where we're at. I really appreciate for everybody coming out to hear us. And yeah.
People know to go to our website.
Yes,
and
go
put
to
their
the-
questions in, and
Yes.
we'll respond.
Yeah, put your questions in on the website also and our info, and definitely we will respond. So, what's that? Oh, yes, this is being videoed tonight, and that will be available on our website probably in a few weeks after we get it, after it's processed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.